Davy. I'm awesome. Welcome to Davy's Awesome Wrestling, where I review wrestling-related things, all from the perspective of a fan, not an insider. So those of you who have watched my channel consistently, you know I am a belt mark. I love wrestling championship belts. Some of them are beautiful, some of them are ugly as sin, and I like to talk about them. And this week I'm going to be ranking the championships of a company that is no longer around, but was very instrumental in my early days as a wrestling fan. Even though I wasn't a big fan of theirs. WCW. They have been gone since 2001, got bought out by WWE. WWE owns their library, and they sell some of their replicas. I don't have any, but they sell them. But here's the thing, WCW had some decent championships, and I'm going to rank them from the worst to the best. Now, as always, the criteria before I get started, this is nothing to do with the prestige of the championships, just my personal opinion of how they look design-wise. The other thing I'm going to be doing, I am only doing championships that were officially WCW championships. Meaning when WCW first came around, they were affiliated with the NWA, and their championships were the NWA championships. But eventually, in 91, 92-ish, they broke off their relationship with the NWA and just became WCW. I'm only doing the championships that were officially WCW championships. At least the ones I believe were. There's a couple on here that I'm a little iffy, like, were these WCW transitioned or were they only NWA? If I'm wrong, go ahead and correct me, but I'm ranking those. I'm not going to rank all the NWA championships because that's just way too many titles. That would be like a 5-hour-long video. So this means there will be 16 different belts. Let's get started with the absolute worst championship WCW ever made. The WCW Hardcore Championship. Good God, that is ugly, and it is not hardcore. It was funny to me that they even tried. Because they got the idea from WWF at the time, now E, that came out with a Hardcore Championship, which was supposed to be a joke. It wasn't supposed to be a real title, but people just liked it so much. It was just a broken up Winged Eagle Championship. It started getting defended and became an officially recognized title for a time. And then they brought on the 24/7 rule and that completely killed it. But their answer to it was, let's make an official belt. And let's make it look as ugly as we possibly can. Now, funny enough, WWE does sell a replica of the Hardcore Championship, but it looks nothing like that one. From what I understand, that was supposed to be the next design for the Hardcore Championship in WCW, but apparently they went out of business before they put it out there. I don't know for sure. All I know is WWE decided to sell that replica because they wanted to go like, well, we got to come up with something just as ugly. Which of those two are uglier? I'm going to say that's a tie. But ultimately, you guys came up with a very ugly belt. Not to mention, it made no sense because no one would ever describe WCW as being hardcore. And at number 15, one that was in contention for final place, the WCW Cruiserweight Tag Team Championships. We'll get to the belt in a second, but first of all, the whole concept was freaking stupid. I will give WCW this. They had a great Cruiserweight division at first. It was very exciting. It was something great to watch. It changed the face of wrestling. Everything started becoming faster paced and everything. But they didn't know how to basically keep it interesting. They basically just had the same 5 guys wrestling each other over and over again to the point that we got bored. Their little way of spicing it up was like, hey, why don't we do a Cruiserweight Tag Team division? And for that, a Cruiserweight Tag Team division. A division made up of smaller guys. Because you gotta remember, before that whole thing, wrestling was mostly just these big, huge, larger-than-life guys, and it became still very fit, but more fast-paced, smaller guys who could do more. And I'm happy about that, but for that, we're gonna give them this huge freaking strap. And the side plates are going to look like wings for a big eagle. Thankfully, this came out and went away almost as quickly. Most people don't even remember that there was a Cruiserweight Tag Team division. But the couple of people that held these belts, it looked horrible on them. Seriously, it almost looked like we were wearing girdles with metal on them. Several years ago, when WWE had their Cruiserweight division going on, they were talking about bringing in a Cruiserweight Tag Team division. I'm glad they didn't. Especially because their leaked design was... ugh. But even that was better than this crap. And at number 14, the WCW Women's Cruiserweight Championship. Which again, I gotta get back to the belt in a second, but ultimately, what a stupid concept. Most women are cruiserweights as it is. This is not like boxing or MMA weight divisions. Cruiserweight was just a way of saying they're not huge. So basically, unless it was like some big, huge woman, they were already a cruiserweight. As far as I know, there was only one champion, maybe two, because it was a concept that really didn't catch. I don't know why they brought in a weight division championship for the women, considering they weren't even really doing anything with their regular women's division. It had a title at the same time as this, but again, a lot of people forget that it ever existed. It was just really something they didn't know what to do with. They used almost the exact same side plates as the other women's championship, just a smaller, weirder looking front plate. But then again, this was kind of the problem with women's championships for quite a while. Up until recent history, there weren't really any that looked really good, because it kind of just seemed like it was always like, okay, we got to give the women something, so just whatever, throw something at them. And they would bring out the most lackluster design they could think of. In at number 13, the WCW Six-Man Tag Team Championships. Which, first of all, again, as a concept, I have never been a very big fan of it. I just don't think there's a point to a Six-Man Tag Team title. WCW created these after the NWA Six-Man Tag Team Championships. Those ones were okay. These ones were awful. To me, there was just nothing to them. They were so no thrills. And it was funny to me when Ring of Honor decided to bring this design back to use as their television championship. Why? In at number 12, the WCW Women's Championship. Not a huge fan of it. It was okay. Like I said, side plates were pretty much identical to the women's cruiserweight, even though this one came out first. But like the women's cruiserweight, didn't have a lot of different champions. I think it only had two. It's hard to remember because it was hard to remember that they even had a women's division. Because again, WCW just didn't know what to do with it. I think they were just like, well, WWF's doing it, so maybe we can. I'll give them this. This design was better than that women's championship they had in WWF at the time. With, you know, the crown in the middle. Kind of make it look like they were a royalty, a queen, if you will. But I will say that for a woman's waist, this was actually kind of very bulky and gaudy looking, so just wasn't a fan of it. And at number 11, one I wouldn't say I hated, but I would say it was just, it was okay, was the WCW Light Heavyweight Championship. Another one that wasn't around for a very long time. Its most famous holder was Brian Pillman, when he was flying Brian Pillman, but it wasn't terrible looking. I wouldn't say I loved it. I remember seeing it and going like, it's okay. The front plate looked very similar, shape-wise at least, to the World Heavyweight Championship, which I guess that was their way of saying like, hey, it's just as prestigious. It wasn't. Side plates were its own, but like I said, there's not much else to say about it. It was kind of a faded gold, and it was just alright. It didn't work very well in WCW. It didn't last very long at all. In at number 10, another one I would say was okay, was the WCW World Championship that they brought in 91, 92-ish. Basically, this is what they brought in when Ric Flair left WCW, went to WWE, taking with him the World Heavyweight Championship because they refused to give him his deposit back. This is what they came out with. I will say this, when it first came out, I hated it. But I will admit, probably I hated it so much because it was replacing one that I really liked. As years have gone by and looking back without the biased eyes, it is okay. But I will say this, the side plates looking almost exactly like the Winged Eagle side plates kind of hurt that a little bit because it kind of made it look like they were just trying to mimic WWF, which this came out during the Jim Herd era, which is exactly what he was trying to do, badly. It didn't last very long. When Ric Flair came back and they got their world title back, that world title became the International Championship, and eventually they got unified and it went back to being the World Heavyweight Championship. But for a little while, this was the top prize in WCW. In at number 9, the WCW Tag Team Championship. First version. I actually was a big fan of the overall design. My only issue with it when I was younger, and even now, is it was so small. Like, compared to the other championships, it was just too small. It looked like, on the bigger guys, as if they were wearing a belt buckle. Kind of my same issue that I had later when they came out with NXT UK and their tag team championships, they were a beautiful design, just not big enough. But either way, I did like them a lot. They were nice looking championships. In at number 8, the WCW Television Championship. The 92 version. The first one when they were officially just WCW, no longer NWA. I believe made by Reggie Parks, who was a brilliant belt maker. Made some of my favorite belts, including my actual favorite belt, the Winged Eagle. But I liked it. It was very nice looking. My only issue was all the ridges on the vein plate looked like touching it would be annoying. Kind of like when you have those cups made out of that stuff that reflects, and if you hold it in a different light, it looks different. And those are cool and everything, but I hate touching them. They just don't feel very good. But ultimately, it was a beautiful championship, but later it got an upgrade. In at number 7, and this is the one that's going to get iffy. The WCW United States Tag Team Championships. I say it's iffy because even on the pictures you can see nowadays, it says NWA on it. I was very much debating if I should include it because from my understanding, and I could be wrong, if you were around back then and you remember, you could go ahead and correct me in the comment section. But from what I remember, it stayed around for very little after it became officially WCW, but they never made a new championship. I don't know if they were going to commission a new championship and just decided, you know what, never mind, let's get rid of it, or what. But from what I understand, it was also only on WCW for a long time. Like, it was through the NWA, but from what I understand, it was an official WCW championship. It's why I decided to include it. Plus, I just really liked them. I didn't like the concept at the time. I just liked the belts. Because I will say this, I don't think the tag team division needs a mid-card. Like most organizations, there's not enough of a tag team division to necessitate a mid-card. I know right now the NWA has the United States Tag Team Championships again, and they're nice looking, but I don't like the concept. But as far as these belts, I did like them. Even though more often than not, I'm not a big fan of a colored strap. I usually like the strap to be black. I just think it looks better. It's a nice classic design. But these ones, it worked. Like I said again, if they didn't have these around when they turned into WCW, like I'm led to believe, go ahead and correct me, but I included them anyway. In at number 6, the WCW Tag Team Championships, the second version, that a lot of people like to nickname the NWO Tag Team Championships because, well, the NWO was the first ones to ever hold them. The Outsiders, they had the other belts. One of them you could tell was damaged. It had one side plate missing. They needed a new belt. They came out with these ones, and I will say I liked these better because, one, like I said, my issue with the other one, these ones were bigger. They looked more like a championship, and I just felt like they fit in more with the other championships going on in WCW at the time. At the time, I didn't feel the first version. It just didn't seem like it looked. It wasn't uniform with the other championships at all. This one kind of was, and it was a beautiful championship. And at number 5, the WCW United States Championship, the Reggie Parks edition. This was the one that later got replaced, which, as much as I love Reggie Park, we'll get to it, but the JMAR version was better. However, this one was still a nice looking championship. It was a 5-plate belt, and later one would be a 3-plate belt. My only issue with it versus the other one was like that middle plate was like looked a little squished, almost as if somebody had gone, grabbed it, and went, let's get it fitting in there. But ultimately, it was still very beautiful. I still love this one. I would eventually buy a replica of it. Easily. It was beautiful. And I will say this, I also love that it inspired the next one. In at number 4, and I know this is going to shock people because it's not farther up the list, but this is my list. Deal with it. The WCW World Heavyweight Championship. The one that started as the NWA when it had a brown strap. Later became this. Later you could see that it had gotten kind of worn. Like towards the end of it being in WCW, the very top bent, and then one of the side plates was like broken and sticking out all the time. You couldn't just make another one? I don't know. This was one that people used to argue was better than WWF's at the time, which was the Winged Eagle, and then later the Attitude. I would say I liked it better than the Attitude one, but not the Winged Eagle. Eventually, when it re-debuted in WWE as the World Heavyweight Championship, the only difference was that one was a little bit more curved and form-fitting, which I liked better. Plus it had WWE at the very top. You couldn't really see it much on television, just if it was like really up close. But either way, the big gold belt was always a beautiful championship, and it's always going to have a nostalgic place in my heart. In at number 3, the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. This thing was gorgeous. WWF into E, during the transition, brought in their version of the Cruiserweight Championship, which the main plate looked very similar. It had 2 side plates on each side, which for some reason didn't look better. For some reason, even though this one was a 3-plate belt and the 2 side plates were these big WCW logos on it, it still looked better that way. And some of you are going like, wait a minute, this was around the same time as a big old belt. You're saying the Cruiserweight Championship looked better? Yes, I am. Even though it was smaller, then again, it was made for smaller wrestlers. I don't know, just something about this design, it just all worked together perfectly. In at number 2, the WCW Television Championship, the final version that they had. I absolutely loved this thing. And it was funny to find out later that this was actually supposed to be the Cruiserweight Championship. It actually debuted not as a Cruiserweight Championship, as a television championship, but the very first match you ever saw it in, if you looked close enough, you could see at the top, it said Cruiserweight. And then the next time it came on television, they put a sticker on it that said Television. So it was a World Television Championship. This one was beautiful. I liked that its shape and design was a throwback to the mid-'80s championship they had in WWF, but still very much its own. And honestly, I would say it looked better than that, even though it was much more simple design. But I talk about that all the time. Sometimes less is more. Which brings us to number 1. My favorite WCW championship they ever had was their last version of the United States Championship, the JMAR edition. It was just such a beautiful championship. Whereas I talked about, I remember with wrestling fans, we'd argue over which one looked better, the big gold belt or the winged eagle belt. We would also argue which looks better, the WCW United States Championship or the Intercontinental Championship. Even though they both looked very similar in design, the front plate at least, had the arches. But I would say the Intercontinental looked better, but I still said to people, like, this is still their best looking championship. It was just very beautiful. Like I mentioned earlier, the Reggie Parks edition was a 5-plate belt. This was a 3-plate belt. I think this just worked better as a 3-plate belt. I mean, number 1, the 2 side plates went better with the main plate, and it just, I don't know, it helped elevate it. I remember even looking at it thinking, like, if I were them, I would have replaced the big gold belt with this, just taken the flag in the US and stuff off of it, put something else on there, maybe a globe instead of a flag to symbolize world. But, they did what they did. They kept the big gold belt around for tradition's sake. But even though this was their upper mid-card championship, in my opinion, this was their best, most gorgeous design they ever had. So there you have it. That's my rankings of the WCW championships, from the worst to the best, and all of it based on just my personal opinion of their design, not their prestige. Hope you guys not only enjoyed the nostalgia, but enjoyed the video. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications for when I post videos, and leave a comment I can respond to in my next comment corner. Tell me if you agree with my rankings. Tell me if you disagree with my rankings. Tell me which was your favorite and least favorite WCW championship. Love you guys.